Hello, hello. Welcome to Foreignsics, the What is Life podcast, where we make the uncomfortable comfortable. I'm your host, Zafreen. I am a first-generation Bengali. Thanks for being here today. As always, these thoughts and opinions are completely my own, as well as my guests today. And you're here to hopefully hear about life and maybe just want a space to feel heard and seen. And if not, no worries too. Just appreciate you being here. And before we dive into today's topic, I wanted to just tee it off to my lovely guest today, Darien. So Darien, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. My name's Darien Ellis. I was born and raised in Silver Spring, Maryland, but I'm Caribbean. My mom is from Trinidad and my dad is from Jamaica. And I'm happy to join you today. I'm so excited.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Just really appreciate it. So for those listening, today's episode is a doozy, I would say. I mean, not that none of these episodes are, but I feel like this one in particular really, really resonates with me. And I know you too, Darien. So for those listening today, we're going to talk about mental wellness. I feel like something that only recently people have started to give the time of day.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. So with that, I wonder, Darien, would you like to share kind of how this topic relates to you and kind of what do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, and it's so funny. I was so used to saying I struggled with mental health, and that is past tense because I finally feel like I'm in a place in my life where I have the tools and resources to self-regulate and bounce back. But I have dealt with depression and anxiety since childhood. And I think what's important with how we'll talk about it today, especially, is the nuance, not even the nuance, but the umbrella of dealing with that in a foreign household, how that impacts how you deal with yourself and how you communicate it to others.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I just want to echo how appreciative I am of you just opening yourself up and being vulnerable in a space like this.
Thank you.
It means a lot, and I hope those listening see that there are those that want to genuinely help others, and we're hoping by sharing our experiences we can shed some light on things that we wish we had someone to reach out to for tools that Darien spoke about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Darien. And to kind of share a little bit about me and how this relates to me is, before I truly dive into that, I just want to share that this episode in particular is going to be hard to navigate because of how prideful our parents can be and just the pride that comes with trying to protect our culture and egos and managing all those different personalities, especially because this topic is seen as so taboo and so negative that we don't intentionally want to hurt anyone's feelings. I just want to be very clear about that. And we don't want to out anybody because it's not on us to share other people's stories, and we don't want to take that power away from anybody. And so all we can do is just share our experiences in the way that we know how, because we ourselves went through it in a different way. And so with that, I do also just want to issue a true trigger warning and just sharing before we jump into the episode. We're going to be talking about some really, really difficult topics, such as self-harming, suicide, domestic violence. And so if you feel like that's something you don't want to hear right now or you can't hear right now, please do not listen to this episode. Please skip it. We are going to be sharing some resources that have helped us in the past and currently, if any of you are struggling. And with that, I'll just pause for a moment and pass on Darien and see if she'd like to add anything.
Yeah, no, I echo those same thoughts. Even when my dad, as he becomes more familiar with my depression and anxiety, he's like, well, why? He'll ask why. And I'm like, well, I'm gonna hurt your feelings if I tell you like the inception of all of these things. So it'll definitely be tough navigating how we want to say things because, you know, if my mom and dad were to watch this, I would just, this is my truth.
Yeah.
I did my best. Like, I'm not slandering you, but this is my truth, you know?
Absolutely. And I appreciate the way you worded that because that's something that has been in the back of my mind for why I'm doing this. And in my first episode, I talked about just being unapologetic as we can be, because these are things that they're hard truths in many ways and hard concepts to even take accountability for and responsibility for. We're not doing this in a way to hurt anybody. I just want to keep reiterating that this is a way for us to share what we went through so that others might not have to. And shout out to hopefully those that do listen that start to bridge these conversations that maybe it can be better one day, because I can attest that for my family, with me and my mom, it has been getting better. and it
Yeah.
continues to get
Yeah.
Okay, so where do we want to start?
I don't know. I feel like we should start with, I mean, for me, like when I discovered I was dealing with depression and anxiety, let's start there. Yeah, so I think in terms of what I want people to get out of this episode when it comes to mental health, mental wellness, is that first and foremost, there is hope. I never thought I would be in a space where, if you will, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I feel like I'm finally like sitting in the light.
Yeah.
And things do get better, but you just have to put the work towards it. And with the work, there are so many resources, and I can name my favorites: therapyforblackgirls.com, therapyforblackmen.com. Every friend that I have referred that website to has found a therapist that they now love. And then also talk about the side effects. If you don't take care of your mental health, if you know that you're dealing with depression and anxiety, there are other things that happen to your brain and your body you may not be aware of. And so I just want to bring awareness around the side effects as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really important. So do we want to just kind of start there then?
Yeah, where do you want to start?
So I think the idea of where was the moment that you wanted to reach out for help or try to realizing something wasn't working?
Yeah, first I knew I was dealing with something since middle school. Mm-hmm. There was one day I ran into, and it was still early morning, like I didn't even get through first period, and I was crying in my guidance counselor's office that day because something happened that morning that was very triggering. Mm-hmm. And the first time I asked for help was my senior year of high school. That's when I started to self-harm, and I went to my mom and told her what I was doing, and I told her that I felt like I wanted to kill myself. I will never forget, she looked at me and she was like, "Kill yourself? Why would you ever want to do that?" And I felt so dismissed. One, but two, I also felt like, why am I thinking this? I shouldn't think this. And I dismissed my own feelings. And so that was the first time I ever reached out for help. And it wasn't until senior year of college where I slowed things down because I had to double up on credits. I was not staying in school any longer than I needed to.
Yeah.
And so I slowed all the extracurricular activities down, but then life started. Everything I had swept under the rug up until that point started to slowly creep out. Yeah. And I didn't know how to deal with it. It was affecting everything. It led me to seek a therapist at the University of Maryland, and that was my first time ever being in therapy from dealing with depression and anxiety for so long.
Yeah.
And I also didn't know I had anxiety until I started therapy. I always knew I dealt with depression, but I couldn't put a name to my anxiousness and, all the other things I was feeling until I started therapy my senior year.
I'm so glad to hear that therapy provided you with the tools that you were seeking and were able to put a name to what was going on, right? Because I can only imagine that feeling so, I don't know, like some sense of relief, right? Of like, oh my gosh, like now that I kind of know what's happening, I can do something about it. It doesn't feel so nebulous, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. And till this day, because there's always things that come up and life will always be lifing. Yes. And even now, my therapist will put names to things that I've never heard of, wasn't able to recognize. So till this day, it helps. Putting a name to an issue just helps you reach so much further in the battle of resolving it and maintaining it. So.
For sure. And I think that's something, I want to touch on a couple of things. One, shout out to the University of Maryland and the therapy services, because that is also my first introduction to therapy as well. For when I was going through I see as one of the major turning points in all the shit that was happening in my family. And I didn't even know those services even existed.
Yeah.
And to sit in a room with somebody and just essentially word vomit what was going on at home, and the person to just verbalize and put a name to what was actually happening. Yeah. And like you were saying, validating how I was feeling, making me feel seen and heard. It was as if a wave had just washed over me, and I just felt so much more, I don't even know, supportive isn't even the right word. Like I just felt
seen.
Yeah, just felt like I was like, damn, like it's not just all in my head. Like this is real life. Like it's not just like, anyways, yes.
Absolutely.
So the other piece of it too, right, is this idea of us seeking out, so us feeling like we don't have the tools to be our best self, right? Like hearing you talk and me just thinking about my own experiences of us going through the motions essentially and realizing that something's not right.
Yeah.
And then it's like we going to those people that were in our initial support system being like, hey, something's wrong, I need help, and then them dismissing us or invalidating us.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? And then recognizing that it's like, I don't know, like I definitely internalized some of that and being like, oh, maybe there is nothing wrong with me. Like there can't be. Like these people who have so much experience, like have gone through life, are saying that it's not.
I agree. You expect your safety net to be a safety net once again. And when you don't receive that, it's almost like it sets a precedent, one, with your relationship with them, like I can't come to you with this anymore.
Yep.
It doesn't become a safe space anymore when you do talk about mental health. And not to say that like I looked at my mom differently, but I just knew I can't talk to her about what I'm experiencing in this capacity. That 100%. Changed over time, but no, I completely agree with you. You expect them to know, and they're like, they don't speak that language.
Yes. Yeah. Oh my God. No, actually, it's so funny because what you shared is something that I realized for certain things. I knew that for certain members of my family, I was never going to get the support and protection that in the way that I wanted from them. And having to come to terms with that and recognizing that in a twisted way that they also have experienced their own trauma and abuse, that I still wanted to be in their life and be able to help. And knowing that I couldn't also empty my cup, like recognizing I had to be conscious of how empty my cup was as I was doing that.
Yeah, you can't pour into someone else if you have nothing to pour.
Oh, 100%.
1 and 2, they have experienced so much trauma that they, till this day, aren't able to say, I have depression, I have anxiety, I have sexual trauma, I have emotional trauma from the way I was brought up. They still don't give a name to what they've experienced. So how can they then help you with something that they don't recognize in themselves or at all?
For sure. And actually, I will say that once certain family members started going through therapy, oh my gosh, like they started naming those emotions. Like to have one of my family members name, like, I'm experiencing anxiety, like this person coming home is giving me anxiety. I was like, oh my gosh, like I felt so much hope in that moment, which I know we kind of talked about in a little bit, where it feels like you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And in this instance, I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna get there. Like it is taking time, but we're gonna get there and meeting this person where they're at.
And you know what? I wish my parents could go to therapy, but I've realized in the way that I have been communicating with them and how that's changed, because I'm more informed and I'm able to inform them on my needs, my boundaries. They can articulate things to me and support me better, just based off, like, I call it like residual therapy. Like there's a little bit of osmosis going on here, and while they're not in the therapy session, I feel like they have picked up on things as a result of me being in therapy for so long. But that is amazing. That's amazing that your mom was able to say that.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it's just been such a change in like how we've been interacting with each other. Like the fact that she'll actually like say thank you, or like she said like I love you to me the other day, and I was like, you said what? So I kind of want to touch on where we were talking about we can't necessarily go to our family for certain things or like certain safety nets and whatnot. I want to kind of just acknowledge that, at least speaking for myself, because I was kind of always seen, or I am in many ways still seen as the fixer, I have to keep reminding myself to protect my own well-being, to not get caught up in the cycle of it. And what I mean by that is if something happens and my mom calls me, she's very heightened because something's going on at home. You know, she's just trying to find somebody to listen to her and at the same time come up with a solution for what she's experiencing. What I used to do is I used to just feed into it, like talk in a circle back and forth of, you know, just acknowledging like what's going on or just being silent and just letting her vent. And I realized I wasn't helping anything, because then I found that I was just having the same conversations over and over again. And it made me realize that I had a call actually where my mom called me and was like, this is happening, like, and just going off in all these different directions. And I had to redirect us and recenter us to be like, okay, well, what is your plan with this information, right? Because I know this is not something that I will say for me in this instance, by me naming what she's going through, by being like, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Like, I'm sure this must be so upsetting. It made her break that heightened state slightly enough to be like, oh my gosh, like, someone is recognizing what I'm going through. Because a lot of times I found that when my mom is going at 900 miles an hour, is because she's never felt heard. And so to just acknowledge that and then come up with a plan, I have been able to, like a plan of like what we're walking away with from this conversation.
Yeah.
Because I found that when I would just talk and just like listen, I found myself being like, well, what was the point of that conversation? Like, what did we get out of that? And so now what I do when I like redirect and being like, okay, now that you've mentioned this, like, what is your plan for what you want to do with this information? What can I do to help? And then making sure, like you said, like maintaining my boundaries for what I can do and what I can help with. And for me, I recognized very quickly, there were just things that were way out of my expertise.
Absolutely.
And way out of what I could actually provide support without sacrificing my own well-being. And so I put it upon myself to find resources that my mom could then reach out to help be a support for both me and her. So all the burden didn't just fall on me.
Yeah. And for me, there's two things there based off of what you said. The first thing is there has to be action. We cannot continue to talk. Like, it's amazing to feel and be heard, but what are we going to do next? Because it is very much a cycle. And for you say, what is the plan? My therapist always says, the goal is, so now that we know what's going on, the goal is, like, that's her thing. And that's important because we have to put things into action in order to remedy them. And then the second thing, we are not Avengers. We're not a part of Marvel Studios. Like, exactly. I cannot save you.
100%.
And especially in knowing what I know about your family, you knowing what you know about mine, y'all are toxic. Like, I cannot. God did not put me on this earth to sit here and save all of you. I can't do it. Much more take on so many burdens. I will break. And I have broken. And so it's like, I can give you the tools, I can give you the resources. I found in the past that when I have done things like email the therapist or try and do this or facilitate a conversation, it doesn't teach them how to help themselves. And so while I would love to save you, that is not how life works. I am not Iron Man. I am not the Incredible Hulk. Marvel needs to give me a contract, and maybe then I will
consider it.
Yeah.
So what you touched on is something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is recognizing the difference between enabling and helping. And that is something that I think is so important for those of us trying to protect our mental well-being and helping our families.
Yeah, and you don't want to come off as selfish. No, I was going to say that's hard to navigate, especially with family members that are in such close proximity to you. It's almost I hate this word because it's harsh, but a sense of entitlement where it's like, you can help me. I know you can do this. So aren't you doing it? And that's not fair to me. And also, you don't know what I've experienced in my life that has put me in a position to feel like I can't help you in the capacity that you want. And also half the time, what you're asking for is actually not going to help you. Let me not. But no, absolutely. It's so hard to navigate because you don't want to come off as selfish and you want to be able to save the people that you love so dearly. But I feel like with family, they have this expectation that they're gonna get the help from their other family, and sometimes you get burned in the process.
Oh, for sure. And all right, so actually I think I want us to pause this episode for right now because we are really getting into some pretty juicy bits, and so because I want these episodes to still feel digestible, I think this feels like a great place for us to stop. And so we're going to end this episode here, and then please tune in next week to essentially hear the conclusion and just continue to be a part of this conversation. Darien, anything you'd like to add?
Nope, you landed the plane.
Oh, thanks. For once, I'm not building it while I'm flying.
That was a good one.
Oh my God, story of my life.